All right, so we're recording. Welcome to Code with Xero. This is specifically for University of Auckland students. So welcome and thank you so much for giving us a whole hour and a half of your time this evening. I think what we'll do to kick this off is we'll start with a few intros. So I'll start. My job here, I'm Alice, and my job here at Xero is Graduate Experience Advisor. So what that means is I look after all of the recruitment and selection of graduates and interns for Xero New Zealand. And basically, once you're in, I do my best to make sure that you're having a great time with your rotations and everything like that. And I'll go into that in a bit more detail later on in the presentation. I'm based in the Wellington office, and I've been here for just over a year now. A fun fact about me is that I'm British, as you can probably tell by my voice, but I was born in Germany and have moved over 25 times. But ironically, I am from New Zealand, technically, but I only just moved here a couple of years ago. So I'm a bit of a pickle geographically. But yeah, that's me in a nutshell. I think I will pass over to Morgan next.
Hello, good evening. I'm Morgan. I'm also in Wellington, so we're a bit geographically spread from a staff perspective. I've been at Xero for about 3-ish years now. So started as an intern back in 2017 and even started as a grad in 2019. And yeah, loving it so far. And yeah, excited. I'm going to be giving you guys a live code demo later, which is always a little bit scary. So we'll see how that goes.
Awesome. Thanks, Morgan. Prae, let's hear from you.
Yeah, hi. My name is Prae, and I am originally from Thailand, but I have been in New Zealand for 14 years, and in the front-end developer for 8, and at Xero for 2.9 years. Yeah, I do Japanese art in my free time, and that's just a little bit about me.
Cool. Yeah, 2.9 years is super specific. I love that. Cool. Alexandra.
Hiya, I'm Alexandra. I'm an associate engineer, which means that I was a grad last year, and so I'm in my first year out of the grad program. I started at Xero in 2018 as an intern through Summer of Tech and joined the grad program in February last year. So it's been about 2.9 years as well, just in case we're counting. But yeah, a fun fact about me, I like doing embroidery on canvas in my free time, and I play the trombone.
Ooh, cool. Oh my God, I play saxophone. We could start a band.
We should.
Oh my God, how tempting. Akshay, finally, last but not least, by any means, Akshay.
Hey, I'm Akshay. I am based in Auckland. I'm an engineer in the expenses team. I joined Xero about almost 4 years ago as a quality engineer, and then I graduated to being an engineer. I moved from India to New Zealand in 2010, so it's been about over 10 years since I've been here. Fun fact about me, I have a dog, and I spend most of my salary on him, and I'm not sad about it.
That's literally my dream. All I want in life is a dog, someone who doesn't pay rent to live with me and just to dote on. Awesome. Okay, so that's who's on the call today. So like Morgan said, Morgan will be going through the back end with all of you in a little bit, and Prae will be going through the front end. Alexandra and Akshay will also be chiming in during the session, but will also be here to answer any questions that you may have. So just to kind of give you a rundown of the agenda, I'll give you a quick overview of Xero, who we are as a company, our purpose, and before I then go on to handing over to Morgan and Prae to do the back end and the front end overview and tech stacks, and some live demoing. Everyone cross your fingers. And then at the end of that, I will give you a really quick overview of our junior talent programs, what the applications involve and the selection process. And then finally, we will have time to go through any questions that you've had over the course of the session, and hopefully we can answer them for you. So just before I jump into it, just a little bit of boring housekeeping. If you could keep your microphones off throughout the session and only unmute yourself when it comes to the Q&A part of the session, that would be awesome, just to reduce any kind of feedback for anyone presenting. But if you're finding that this is not your jam at all, that is absolutely fine. Please feel free to drop off, or if you've got something you need to go to, we will not be offended. We won't be taking down any names. Do not worry. You can just drop off and do your thing. Like I said, we're recording this, so if you do need to catch up where you left off later on, all good. And if you do have questions and you're worried that you won't be able to remember them by the end of the session, there is a Q&A function in Google Meet. So if you look up to the top right-hand corner in between the chat sort of symbol and the time button, there is a button which has a triangle, a square, and a circle. So if you click on that, you can click on Q&A, and you can submit a question in there as you're thinking of it. And then if other people see your question and like it, they can upvote it and vice versa. So that's a really good way for us by the end of the session to know which questions are really the burning ones for us to answer. Okay. Cool. Right, so I'll get into it. So this is going to be a little bit of an overview of Xero and who we are. You may well have heard of us, especially if you're in New Zealand. Most people have heard of us, which is a bit of a luxury, and we're very appreciative of that. But essentially, who Xero is we're a global leader of online accounting software, and what that software does is it connects small businesses to their advisors and also other services. So this is a bit of a snapshot, a bit of a visual snapshot of what our platform looks like. Granted, that is a pretty old iPhone that we have there. I should probably get a newer version of that. But yeah, you may be familiar with what we do, like I say, but our main customer base is basically small and medium-sized businesses. So they really are our bread and butter, and we do what we can basically to help them with running their businesses. So if anyone has had experience running a business or a small business, you will probably know that it's very tough and can be really stressful because there's just so many things for people to do. You're often doing multiple jobs when you're running a business. So one of our aims is really to provide a platform that makes running a business as stress-free as possible for our customers and makes life easier for them in general. So we can help them in a few different ways. It might be giving them real-time visibility of their financials or their performance. So things like their cash flow, their invoicing, and also help with paying their employees and things like that. So all of it is basically in an attempt to make it as simple, smart, and secure for them to use as possible. So that's us in a really high-level overview. There's a lot of different teams that go into making it happen, but I'll keep it pretty high level for now. So in terms of our purpose, this is basically what motivates us and kind of gets us out of bed, so to speak, every day. So our purpose is basically to make life better for people in small business and also everyone involved in that small business and communities around the world. So we really want to try and help them as much as we can, however we can, in running small business or medium-sized businesses. So this is an example of one of our customers, the little veggie patch. So if our purpose is sort of what drives us, our vision is basically what we want our end state or our end goal to be, which is to be the most insightful and trusted small business platform. So basically what that means is we want to find ways not just to regurgitate data points or financials to our customers, but to feed that back to them and anyone else involved in those small and medium-sized businesses in as helpful a way as possible and make it as insightful as possible. So that can help them basically make their own decisions off the back of the data or those financials and connect the dots themselves. As you may know, losing trust is really, really easy to do, but gaining it and maintaining it is pretty hard. And so that's a really important driver for us. And we want to basically keep building on that trust that we already have and continue to help our customers in realizing their goals through our platform. And we call ourselves a business platform because it's not just Xero. We actually have over 800 different apps now who are on our ecosystem or part of our ecosystem, and they're all connected through an API, which is really awesome because what that does is it connects all of our users to multiple different apps that can help them. They can sort of tailor their application, their subscription basically, so that they can get all the different sort of helpful apps that can help them make their business and their day-to-day life as awesome as possible. So in simple terms, we are a global platform that is trying to seamlessly connect businesses together and save them time and enable their success. So this is a pretty simple slide. I just wanted to give you a real simple snapshot of our growth from day dot to current day. So we've been around since 2006, where it was literally 4 employees, 4 friends pretty much, in an apartment here in Wellington. So it was the CEO, an accountant, and 2 developers who kicked it all off. And fast forward to today, we're now over 3,500 staff and growing. I think we're looking to hire well over 1,000 new members of staff globally this coming year, which is really exciting. So it's a very it's a really exciting time to join us if you do join us. And we've gone from having a few thousand customers back in the day to over 2 million customers, which was a few months ago we hit that milestone. So yeah, pretty fast, speedy trajectory that we've gone through. And also in terms of our growth, it's not just numbers based, we've also spread out geographically. So now, like I say, we started in Wellington, but now we're in all of these different locations across the world, which is super cool. Obviously with last year, there being COVID and stuff, there hasn't been that much travel, but yeah, I've finally been allowed to go to Auckland fairly regularly, which is bizarrely exciting for me. But yeah, if you were to join Xero, there are quite a few different offices where, if a little bit further down the line after your grad year, it could be possible to maybe relocate to one of these offices or be working with teams who are in these different offices. So that's pretty fun to look forward to as well. Cool, well, that's pretty much it from me in terms of the overview. I think I will now pass it over to Morgan to talk about what coding is like at Xero in terms of the back end.
Awesome. So if we jump one more slide ahead, so when in software companies, we often like to talk about back-end versus front-end development. It's a term that we probably not everybody necessarily understands to the same level. So if we go to the next slide, often we look at development and we've got above the water our front-end development, and the iceberg is quite a good example. So that's what you see is, as a user, you see that front end. Often that front end is really well polished, and we want it to because we like customers to have a really good time. But then underneath, there's lots of things supporting it. And a lot of the time, there's a lot more underneath than there is above, and there's a lot more of that sort of magic that makes it work. And often these days, that back end isn't just one solid bit of ice. It might be lots of chunks of ice all working together to create that front end experience. So if we go to the next slide. So the backend's main role is to expose data to the front end. So the front end will ask the backend for some data will give it to the front end will display it to the user. It's where we keep our business logic. So that term means the logic that's really specific to our application. So an example for us, a lot of our application does accounting work, so our business logic is that accounting. So for example, we might be summing up items on an invoice, for example. So what's really important if you're working in the back end is about writing correct and easy code. Correctness is easy to get to. I would argue, but the easy code is the hard part. So that's writing clean code that's really easy to read. That's writing maintainable code that is easy for other people to come along and change, and really easily testable code, because we want our code to be as solid and as correct as possible. We also talk about non-functional requirements. So what that means is that there's often a lot of work we do which doesn't directly impact the customer. So a customer might go, well, might say to me, oh, well, what have you done? And I'll say, well, I worked on fixing this bug in this one system which causes it to go slightly slow one day. The customer doesn't really see that much, but it's still important to us, and it's important for us to be able to run a scalable platform and a reliable platform. If we look at the next slide, there's kind of a big mesh of logos here, but this is really just to illustrate that there's lots of different technologies that we use. I'd emphasize we don't really expect you to know any of them. What we want you to have as you come into working with us in the grad program is just a solid ability to learn. A lot of the specifics, a lot of those sort of concepts are quite transferable between certain things. So most of these things that you're seeing on the screen we have used at Xero, but if we look at the next slide, we'll kind of narrow down to what the biggest common stack is in the back end at Xero. So we are a C# shop. With the .NET framework over top. So that's a framework that Microsoft has created. It's a really nice framework. It's existed for quite some time, and it was, I think it was pretty much the most popular framework when we started, which was called .NET Framework. These days we use this thing called .NET Core, which is a slightly more slimmer down version of .NET Framework and has some advantages because it can run cross-platform. Some teams also use some other platforms. So an example is Go or Node or Python. Python is especially used in our data science work. It's really dependent on what works best for your team. Most like significant majority of Xero uses C# and .NET. We have lots and lots of databases, but again, most teams will be using a SQL database, Microsoft SQL. There are also teams using DynamoDB, Redis Postgres, and plenty more. We're completely hosted on Amazon Web Services, AWS. So AWS is a service that Amazon provides to companies like us, and they help us host our code on servers. And they provide great tools which make hosting really easy. It means that we don't have to spend time putting servers in racks and wiring them up. We can just ask Amazon to provision a server, and a minute later we'll have one. Microservices is a bit of a buzzword that tends to get thrown around a lot these days. And what the idea is that instead of these days, because infrastructure is really easy to create with AWS, instead of making massive apps that do all the things in one place, we like to split it down. That means that each separate part of the app is independently deployable. So one team can own this app and deploy it by themselves, not worrying about what the other team over there is doing. As long as your contracts between the services all match up, it works great. Continuous integration. So that's a term which talks about, we really like to ship code fast. So that means once I've finished writing some code, I want to get it out in front of my customers as quick as possible. So continuous integration is really useful for that. So it means that once I've checked my code in, it'll automatically get tests run, it'll automatically be built, and then it'll automatically also be deployed. Infrastructure as code. So this is a term which talks about when we interact with AWS, we want to tell AWS which resources we like. So we use a few different ways of doing this. One of the most popular ones is Terraform. So this is like a kind of a JSON sort of file where you define, I want 3 servers and I want a database and I want this. And then you write it down in a text file, and then you kind of tell AWS, cool, set them up, and it does it all for you. And then we have the concept of PaaS. So it stands for Platform as a Service, which means that we have teams at Xero, which their entire job is to help other teams do their job faster. So a good example of that is Kubernetes, which is a container orchestration platform, which is just another way of running code. We have some teams which look after our Kubernetes cluster for us, which means that me as an engineer, I don't have to think much about it. I don't have to worry about it. Somebody else has done that for me. If we look at the next slide, this is what we're trying to avoid. So often in software, we put a lot of effort into making our front end look really good. And then our back end is stitched together, gross, really hard to work with, and a bit scary. So what the trap that a lot of people fall into is using a nice looking front end to hide really bad back ends. So we really want to emphasize that our goal is for the back end to be as beautiful as our front ends. Speaking of front ends, if we go to the next slide, I think Prae has some things to say.
Yep. So as Morgan said, we want to make sure our backend is as beautiful as our front end. But as the company grows to our kind of size, with multiple teams in multiple locations, front end slips once in a while. And so our job as front end group practice is to make sure that that beauty is cascade beautifully among all the systems. And if we move on to the next slide, what is front end generally? The whole, in a nutshell, is basically presenting the beautiful data that people like Morgan has gathered up for us and presented to a user in a meaningful and usable way. And in theory, we don't deal with business logic, but sometimes we do slip, and that's when we find smelly code, and that's where we pass it over to the backend guys and like, hey, can we not do that on the front end? Next, please. So front-end at Xero, in a nutshell, we have JavaScript, and we put TypeScript on top of that. Now, if you are from a computer science background, you realize that JavaScript doesn't come with types. So something could be a num, could be all sorts of types, and your code could just fail on you, and you don't know what's happening. JavaScript gives you all the freedom in the world, but it's gone to the point where as we scale, we do need control. We do want structure. And so we started to import a lot of the classic object-oriented programming concepts from C#, from .NET, from all the others in. And that's where TypeScript does come into our front end. It basically looks just like normal JavaScript, but it has more rules around it. And the terminal would scream at you if you're doing something that's really off-looking or you're not declaring your types properly. So that's a good type check for us as front-enders. At Xero, though, we do use Zoe as a component library. Zoe stands for Xero's User Interface. There's a whole team that actually manage this, so they focus on building scalable UI, which is really exciting. But for us, people who are just implementing, who are out of Xero, who are out of Zoe team, our job is to make sure that we do follow Zoe's guidance on what is the best practice in terms of UI, UX, and even how to implement error states, the kind of way, because Zoe team is really good at guiding us into the consistent direction. So that let's say if tomorrow I jump on another team, because for whatever reason I want to work another product, I look at the code base front-end wise and go, yep, I can see the pattern here. I can quickly get started. And so again, it suits our scalability. We focus mainly on HTML, CSS, SAS on top of the set JavaScript and TypeScript. We actually also, putting another buzzword in here, because Morgan was mentioning something about microservices. We're actually moving towards micro frontend, where each group of product would have a component of backend that's standalone and a component frontend that's standalone, and that comes out together, rather than here's one frontend to rule them all and make it not scalable. But yeah. So as you can imagine, putting it all together can be pretty hard, because you have so many teams. You're trying to make this visual barbecue, and then most of the time it ends up looking like this. Hence why there's a lot of collaboration going on. There's a whole team of front-end experts who help guide where front-end should be going at Xero. And so, yeah, it's challenging. All right. I think, if I remember correctly, this is where, if you're curious about React and you want to try out for yourself, you could just hop on to Create React App and just get started, play around. Or if you already know how to do it, then go and extend your app, have fun with it, add TypeScript just to play around to see what front-end at Xero feels like. But this is probably where we're going to start our demo.
That's correct, yes. So I'll stop presenting now so that you and Morgan, well, Morgan first can present. Awesome.
Awesome. So the first thing I'd also say is that although we've kind of talked about them separately here, at Xero most of the time, we don't really separate out our engineers from front end and back end. So we tend to prefer full stack, which means that you work from both the front end experience to the back ends to your infrastructure, and you do everything in between. It's really useful because in an agile world, it means that anybody can pick up any task and that we're not siloing off kind of our knowledge and experience. But it does mean that some people also do like to specialize in certain areas, and that's okay too. So let me just get my notes up. So what I have today is a bit of a coding exercise for us, for you all to watch along. We're calling this Code with Xero, and the intention of this is really just to show off a bit of our tech stack, kind of show a bit what coding in .NET and our React front ends are like. So what we have is we have a app, and its job is to show the user tweets. So very simple, and our idea is to call the Twitter API, get some tweets, do some business logic to it, and then display it on the front end nicely for our user. So this means that we need a few different components. So what I'll start off with is building a API. So our API, what it will do is it will call Twitter's API. It will then take that data in and it will do some stuff to it, and then present it in a nice and easy way for our front end to call. What I will be writing it in is .NET Core. And I will kind of walk you through along the way. So I've already got a structure here. So if I just get my presentation ready, forgive me if anything goes wrong. Live coding is always, yeah, you're always trusting the computer. So what I've got set up here is I have, thank you, Alice. So I have my IDE, so my coding environment. I personally use JetBrains Writer. At uni I use, it's mostly because at uni I used IntelliJ. A lot of devs at Xero will use Microsoft Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code, which is a kind of a lighter version of Visual Studio. I like Writer. A lot of people do. It's kind of personal preference, really. And so some teams, they have a tooling which is really specific to an IDE. So what we have is we have our Tweets app on the right. So the intention of this is it's going to be building an API for our front end. So the term API means Application Programming Interface. And what that really means is it's rules that we both the front end and the back end agree to abide by. So it means that the front end knows exactly what the back end is going to give it, and that's what an API is. So our job is going to be to give the front end what it needs in a format that it wants. One question we could have for this app is why not just connect to Twitter directly from the front end? Yeah, you could. It depends on what you want to do with the results. So what we have here is we want to get we're going to have some business rules that we're going to apply to the tweets as we pass them along. So it means we can do this in the back end and we don't have to do it at the front end. Also at Xero, we like to split kind of these things out into our backends for front ends, or BFF, which is a common pattern. And the reason why is it means that we're not overloading our front ends with too much logic. We want to keep them nice and light and easy for our users' browsers to download. We are an API first organization, which means that when we're generating, when we're writing code, our job is to write an API that anybody, internal or external, can call. So you as a student, you could go to developer.xero.com and call some of our external APIs. You actually call them in the same way that we do internally. We also have extra APIs internally that aren't public, and so that's what most of backend engineering is writing these APIs. What we're going to be using today for our API responses is JSON, which is JavaScript object notation. These days it's very common, mostly because it's really easy to parse and it's human readable. A common alternative is XML, which looks a bit like HTML, and then there's some things like you could do gRPC, which is binary blobs, which are really efficient, but us as humans can't really read them that well. So we find JSON quite easy. For our contract, so what we've got here, so I've got a browser here showing you the call. So our API, we've got a URL of /API/tweets, and we have a query parameter where I can put a handle in. And the idea of that handle is that's what my search parameter is. Another one that we could, the other one common question is when you're developing for a JavaScript frontend, why not just use JavaScript in the backend? So Node.js. It's kind of, you could. Ultimately, it's kind of decided by your workplace in an extent. We commonly use .NET. There's a lot of reasons for that. It's quite performant, works really well with SQL Server, and these days it's really quite a nice programming language. We do use some Node.js, so yeah. Yeah, it can be. Yeah. So what I have here is I have our tweets controller. So in .NET, a controller is basically just an API endpoint, an endpoint on a URL, and it's a class which tells the internals what to do when an HTTP request comes in. So we route it by going /API/controller. Because it's called the tweets controller, it means that /API/tweets works. And then we have methods. Each method can respond to lots of different things. So we can have a get for when you just want to retrieve information. You can have a post for post is used when the front end has information it needs to tell the back end. We can actually name this whatever we want. So if I name this hello world, and just wait for it to restart, that'll still work on the same URL. It's because that routing is done up there. But what we've got is a really basic method here. All it does is it returns OK. That means it just returns a HTTP 200 response with empty text. And as you can see in my browser, that if I just go to the network tab, you'll see that, cool, I've got a 200 OK that gets received with no response data. First thing I want to do is I just want to show that you can return response data. So if I put hello world in here, I will then get that text on my browser. So there's hello world. But the first thing I want to do towards creating our app is I want to do some input validation. A good thing to always remember is that you shouldn't trust what your users give you. And I'm not meaning that in a nefarious way. I'm just meaning that security vulnerabilities exist, and we want to make sure that we handle those. In this example, I'm not going to go too deep into the security side, but what I want to give an example of is just giving some really basic input validation. So what I will do is if our string is null or white space, so I'll just pass that string in, I will return bad request. So what's happening here is that here we've got the string handle as a parameter into our method. When you have a controller and you have a method with a parameter like that, all it does is it just maps to the query parameter there. So if you see I've got that handle equals Google, well, the string Google will get passed in. So what I'm saying is that if the user hasn't inputted a handle in there, I want to error out because that's not valid. So to show that that works, if I just leave that empty, oh, I got a 400 bad request. This JSON here, that's generated by the .NET Core libraries. You can customize that as you will, but just by returning bad requests like that, it returns that JSON blob. Cool. So next we want to call the, we want to get some data. So we've got this input validation, which makes sure that if I leave it empty, it has an error, and if I don't, it'll keep going down the code path. Now what I want to do is I want to return some data. So we're going to call the Twitter API. We've got a helper class called the Twitter API wrapper. If this will work. Nope. So this is a class that's been provided to us that does all the complicated stuff of authorizing with the Twitter API and getting that data back. So that's cool. Don't need to worry about that. So what I will do here is I will create a variable called Twitter API, and I will instantiate a new copy of that Twitter API wrapper. .NET is an object-oriented language, so I'm instantiating a new copy of that API wrapper. I need to pass some keys in, so I'm just going to copy and paste this piece here. What this is effectively doing is it's getting some keys from my environment variables, so basically just from my system preferences, and putting them into that class so that the class knows how to talk to Twitter. Which is cool. So we've got our wrapper. So our wrapper has some methods on it that will help us get our tweets. So if I create a new variable, so this will be where we get our response from the API. So I'll call it Twitter API response, and I will go Twitter API dot get tweets. So that's a really simple method that just gets those tweets for us. It wants two parameters, a hand name and a screen name, so that query parameter, and a count, which is just the number of tweets we want at a maximum. So now we've got our API response. All we can do is just pop it into our our 200 response, and then if I save that, and then hopefully this builds. Cool, that built. Then if I refresh this, hopefully we should have some data come back. So these are tweets for the Google Twitter account, and they've come back. So that's cool. What next? So we can stop there because that actually works, and it will give the front end some data that it needs. But right now, we're just getting this from the Twitter API. We're just getting a string. So this variable here, if you look at the what my IDE is telling you, it's a string, which is cool because I can just pass that along. But what I actually want to do is I want to take that data and I want to turn it around. I want to do some stuff to it. I want to morph it, maybe. Maybe I want to delete some data, what have you. So what I want to do is I want to deserialize it. What that kind of means in a nutshell is it takes that string and converts it into objects that we can use in .NET. So in the same way that you might create a new object like this by going new object and passing some parameters in there, what we will do is we'll call a method called deserialize, and what it will do is it will automatically take that JSON that Twitter's returned and turn it into objects for us. So in this case, we will go, we'll create a variable called tweets, and we'll use a base package that already exists for us. This is what .NET provides. So it's called Json Serializer, and we've got a deserialize method. So that method will take that string, that response string, and it will pass that in. And then all I need to do is I need to tell it what object style, what type I want it to convert that into. So I've got a object already created for me. So if I show you what that object looks like, this is called Twitter search result, and it has inside of it a list of tweets. So if you can see, that's a list of tweets. And then if I click on tweet, you can see that each tweet has a user, a created time, a ID, a message, and retweet counts and what have you. So what's super cool is that this here will take that list that we see over here, it'll iterate through each of them, and it will construct a new tweet object for them. And then the only other change I want to make is I want to return that list. So if we hover over that, you will see that it's a object of Twitter search result. Twitter search result contains a list of tweets. So if I refresh over here, if I just let my API start, there we go. You'll see here this list is a lot shorter. And that's because all of those data that's come in has been mapped to our objects. And the bits that we didn't have included in our tweet class have been thrown away. We don't worry about that. So that's super awesome. So now we can now I can do whatever I want with these tweets. So I have a list of tweets in code, and I can do whatever I want. But what I want to do first is I want to tidy up what I've got here a little bit. In coding and in software, we have what we call architecture, which is we want to design our code in a way that's really simple to use and simple to change and easy to work with. So what we're going to do is we're going to implement what's called the repository pattern. The reason why we're implementing that is this is the controller. What the controller's job is just to take that request, do some validation on it, and then pass it along to somewhere else in the code. What the repository pattern will do is it will give us a place for our business logic to sit. So that's that logic where I might decide to remove some tweets from the list, or I might decide to flip the list, or I might decide to order it or sort it or whatever. So what we've got in our repositories folder here is we've got a tweets repository. This tweets repository has a method called getTopTweets. That method's job is to take that list and return the top ones. So I want to move this code over to the repository. So the way I do that, so firstly I want to change this controller so that the controller calls the repository first. And then once I have that repository set up, then I will implement that method in the repository to do that top tweets stuff. So first thing I will do is I'll just get rid of this code. And I will, what I want to do is I want to call that repository. So that tweets repository, its job will be to call that Twitter API wrapper, get those tweets back, and then do some business logic on it. Cool. Then, once I've instantiated a copy of the repository, I will get a list of tweets by going tweets repository.getTopTweets, and I'll pass that handle in. And then at that point, I'll return those tweets to our API consumers. So if I try this out, once that loads, you will see that this here will throw an error, which is super annoying. But the reason for that is this method here, this get top tweets method, that hasn't been implemented. So that method doesn't have anything in it other than an error throw. So what we'll do is we'll take that that Twitter API wrapper code that we've written before in the controller, and we will plonk it in here. Sorry, my copy and pasting skills aren't great. I'm just copying and pasting this from a script I've got next to me, so that's why I keep looking off to the side if you've noticed that. And let me just fix some of this indentation. Cool, and then if you look here, this JSON converter hasn't been imported, so let me just try and import that. Just remember how to do that. Sorry, JSON converts from an old version, so it's that JSON .deserialize as we did before. So what we've got here at the moment is actually the same thing operationally we had before, but we've separated out those concerns. So this checking the input is done in the controller, and then the actual logic of calling that API is done in the repository. And this is really important to note, is that the architecture is really important. Because what it means is that if I wanted to change how I got the tweets, I only have to touch this part of the code. I don't have to touch the controller, other than just changing where the controller is calling, which is super cool. And if I go over here, hopefully, right to the demo gods, it works the same as before. So we've got our list of tweets, which is super cool. So at the moment, what you'll notice we're doing is we are constructing a new tweets repository and a new Twitter API wrapper for every request that comes in. Now, this has some disadvantages, and the reason why is because every time you construct one of these objects, it gets put into memory. And you don't want your code to use too much memory. Yes, in a language like this, we have what's called a garbage collector, which deletes things you aren't using. But instead, what we can do is we can just instantiate one of these for every request. And the way we do that is we use what's called dependency injection. This is something which is quite unique to, well, not unique to .NET, but this is something that .NET leans on quite heavily. So the way dependency injection works is that you tell, when you start up the program, you create a new object, those new objects, and then you share them amongst everybody else. You share that one instance. Those objects have to be designed in a way that they can handle that. So the way we do this, or the way we implement this, is firstly, so here in the controller, I want to be able to call the repository. So what I do is I create a read-only parameter up here. It's called tweets repository. Helps if I actually put it in the right place. So what I want to do is I want to put it inside the class, not inside the namespace. So put that in the class, and then I'll just use a little trick to create what's called a constructor. If you're used to object-oriented languages, you will have seen a constructor before. Now, this is where kind of some weird magic-y stuff happens. But the way we do dependency injection is we put a parameter in the constructor, and we pass that version along. But for now, just to show you how it works kind of at a simpler level, we've got this tweets repository, and here I'll just put that new tweets repository there for now. And then instead of creating a new one here, what I can do is just call this class-wide one. So now the class is sharing the same version of the repository. We'll do the same thing for the repository itself. So it needs a copy of the API wrapper. And then it also needs a constructor where this stuff here happens. So if I just do some nice copy and paste. Cool. And then I call that instead. So now if you look, these methods here are becoming a bit simpler to look at, which is really important because we want our code to be clear. So now if I save that, and then just wait for it to start. Cool. And then refresh this, we get the same thing again, which is cool, but we've done a little bit of refactoring. Now, what we do is we do that more advanced dependency injection. So the way we do that is we use interfaces. So what this means is that tweets repository doesn't care which specific implementation of the API wrapper it's given. It just wants to know that it's got an API wrapper. So we write what's called an interface for the API wrapper. The interface just defines some methods that the implementers know the API wrapper will have. And then the API wrapper, we use this notation to say this implements that interface. And then we make sure it has, say, the get tweets and the get mentions methods. So the way we dependency inject is instead we say here I want the server to give me a copy of Twitter API wrapper, and then instead of creating a Twitter API wrapper here, I will just use that copy of Twitter API wrapper that's been given to me. I just have to change this to that interface, and then it works. We'll do the same for the controller. So what the controller wants, so instead of a tweets repository, I'll have an iTweets repository, which just says it's an interface. I will tell the compiler that I want a iTweets repository given to me when I get created at startup, and I'll give it a name, and then I will pass that along. So now this looks very tidy because I've got none of that, API create that construction, and this looks nice and tidy now too, which is cool. But what I need to do is create that. I need to create those classes on startup, like when that code starts on its first run. The reason why is if you look here, this will just not work. There we go, because it's like, oh, I don't have a Twitter API wrapper and a copy of that interface. So this is what we do in the startup file. So the startup file here, we have these methods here called add_scoped, which basically says if any classes ask for an iTweets repository, give them this copy of tweets repository. Same thing with the API wrapper. So just been commented out lately. So it says that for every class that wants a Twitter API wrapper, give me this version of the API wrapper, this instantiation. So this is the way that we have only one copy of that object that's reused across the entire project. Just wait for that to restart. And hopefully, cool. Code works, which is awesome. And now it means that these classes look a lot simpler. This might seem quite over the top, but this is quite useful when we really want to write testable code. And the reason why, like, what I might want to do is I might want to test and write a test which makes sure that the tweets repository gives me the top tweets. But in that test, I don't want to actually call the actual API. So I mock out the API by providing a version of iTwitter API wrapper, which is fake. So it means that I'm only testing this code here. Oops. It means I'm only testing that code, nothing else. And it means that later on, if that Twitter API wrapper changes, say the Twitter changes how their API is called, I only have to change that the implementation of the Twitter API wrapper. Everything else, as long as it matches the contract, will continue to work. If I was to do any next steps from this point, I would, up here, this is how we import code. So I've removed some of those unused using notes, imports. I would write tests for all of this, but we don't quite have enough time here really to go into test-driven development, but that's a really important part of how we work. We write tests first, the tests fail, then we write the code until the tests pass, and then we'll refactor that code so we can make it more efficient. Oh, I see we had a question. I'll just jump into a quick question before we move on. What's the difference between add scoped and add singleton? So what add scoped and add singleton mean? So what a scoped request means is that it gets instantiated per API request. Whereas singleton means that, and it uses what's called the singleton pattern, which means that you've got that one instance that gets used no matter what on that app. So it's per request or per app. So for this demo, the repository is quite small, but say you continue to extend this project by adding more methods, how do you avoid creating a sort of God object that does too much? What approach would you take here? So there's a few ways you can do that. So it all kind of depends on what your business model is. So for example, yeah, we might have a tweets repository which has top tweets and mentions and what have you. But then we might have another class that will create tweets. So we might have that tweets repository which calls down to further classes. Or we might not use this repository pattern at all. There's lots of different ways to kind of go about that, but it's really good that you're identifying that as a problem now, because ultimately, if you don't think about it now, it becomes harder to fix later on. Cool. If there isn't any other questions, I will pass on to Prae, who will give us a nice, beautiful front end over top of this.
Okay, I'm going to kick you out now, Morgan, while you're waiting for the question. Sweet. All right. Hang on. Can you see my screen? No. Yes.
Yeah,
Yep.
It's just loading now. Yeah.
Beautiful loading. That lag. It's like made my heart sink slightly, always. All right. So now we're on to the front end bit. We've got this beautiful code from Morgan passed on to us, and we're like, right, how do we make this more user-friendly? Because users don't want to look at those JSON objects on their pages. They want something that they can interact with, or they can scroll, and something that make them feel, ooh, I'm in the dark. To make them feel all, like, make the app more appealing to them. So as you can see here, this is a Xero version, I guess, of Create React App. We have Create Xero App. It comes pre-shipped with inclusion of Zoe, which is the Xero design system. A quick sneak peek, this is what it looks like. You can't see it outside anyway, so I don't really mind. But here, there's like code snippets that I could use. So if I'm new to building an app in the Xero way, there's a whole bunch of documentation and support system that would help you with your, building out a UI, even if you're not a comfortable designer or like a visual person. So let's get started. Now, I'm gonna first, in this repository, we see there's a UI folder structure here, and there's a source and there's index. So that's very similar to what you would find in standard Create React app. I will have to go into the repo. So I'm cding to the UI, and then I run npm start. If you're not sure what commands available in your project, go check out the package.json file. That's usually where all the goodies are. All right, so right now we're waiting for the whole thing to load up, and hopefully something will load up here in a moment. We see setup initialize, yep. All right. Oh, wow, it is extra slow right now.
It must know that you're presenting or something.
I know, right? Must be the case. I blame Google Meets. Or...
Yeah. Or something, anything.
Yeah. All right, so we have localhost 8080 and then tweet with 0. When you look at our index TSX, first you're probably looking at this and go, that's not the kind of React you're used to seeing. If you look at the old documentation of React, this is kind of what you'll be more familiar with. But the more modern version has been made in a way that's slightly easier for people to use. Now, first though, we want to structure this in a way that is, I guess, more accessible. Because the thing that you want on this page is to have a heading of tweet with 0. Right now it's a paragraph, so screen readers won't read in the proper way. Let's actually dive in. So we're going to go illicit direct, DOM, whoop, and why is everything so laggy? And then I'm gonna go here, and instead of that, I'm gonna go H1. Then children 0. Then removing all that. Nope, please don't autocorrect for me. All right, then we go maybe by app. All right, so what I just did here was pretty much going making sure I got my, nope, I didn't close my bracket properly. That's why it's screaming at me. Cool. So what I'm doing now is I am going, I'm going React, please render H1 on the page. And inside H1, please pop in tweet with 0. And where do we want this on the page? We want this to be embedded inside element ID app. Now let's see argument. Hang on a second. No overload. Let's just go. I did practice this before I came. That's right. All right, because what I'm doing now is I am going React. That's my mistake here, because like you don't want to be calling React window flag. So what you do is that you go React DOM, and inside you go React now render the following thing. Still failed to convert prototype of React. Ah, beauty of live coding. Always something interesting. So this is actually, I'm not rendering. Why am I rendering twice? Create element. Okay, that was my mistake, my bad. So React DOM, please render React. Now go inside this DOM, create element H1 with the children of tweet with 0. And then where do we put it? We put it inside element. And hopefully this time it'll work. All right, that's a long journey. Now we have tweet with 0 with H1. But this is very counterintuitive. Imagine coding a whole UI out using these syntax. That's pretty horrible to be using as a developer experience. And so that's why we usually use JSX instead. And that's a syntax, an extension of JavaScript, which lets you write HTML-looking thing inside JavaScript itself. So how you do that would be, so we look at React app. Instead of having this, I'm going to go, all right, inside create element, I'm going to find h1. And inside h1, it's going to say tweet with 0. No brackets, obviously.
I think it's confusing about the semi.
Yeah, I was thinking a semicolon. Nope, that's right. You don't need this, of course. It's a problem when you write refactored code. You forget the basics very quickly. All right, so we have DOM rendering tweet with 0 in a more human and developer-friendly way, because again, we're used to HTML here. Next, we're going to, I guess, create a new functional component called app, so that we can move our heading text into it. Because in this way, imagine a whole bunch of HTML code. It's getting hard to work with. In this case, we usually go. We create a const, and then app. Oh dear. And this is where we're going to go. Yep, inside this const, we're going to. 0. Yep. And now we can remove that. Okay, so now that we create app, we want the React DOM to then render this app for us. So we're going to go app here. And again, with React flavored anything, it's a self-closing tag. So now we go, yep, we create app here, DOM render this app inside app ID. All right, it's compiled successfully. It still looks exactly the same. There's no error as far as I can see. So I'm going to dive on to then make a basic layout with the UI XUI component. So in XUI documentation, I already know that we have to import a component called header. So we're going to go ahead and import that now. So import XUI page header from this particular Xero XUI library. Great. Now we want to Yep, of course. So instead of hand coding our header with our own style and our div, we want to just replace this with, oh, my bad. Right, I've lost my place. Great. So inside const, when this again is suitable for like the small components like this, but when we're going to start expanding it and writing it in more detail, we're probably going to turn into a class. It's a bit old-fashioned, but it is a lot more familiar and a little bit easier to read in this regards. So we're going to go component. Whoop. Then we're going to render. Okay, always opening bracket. Then we're rendering this here. All right. So what we've just done is we've then make this a little bit easier to read by going, yep, app extend React component, because there's a component that now. And then we render this page header with 0. So hopefully what will happen is as this page refresh, it will it would then pull in the Zui page head style, and it would add title of tweet with Xero onto the page. So now we can see that tweet with Xero has appeared with its own sort of like Xero flavored style that we're familiar with today. Then let's say I want to add another component. This is where we want to make sure that our code is indented properly, because otherwise you can't find your place. And so let's actually just do that real quick. So we have a header. Now we want to display our tweet inside some sort of an area. And we do that by adding a panel in. That's called a Zui panel. We have a class name. So again, we can read the documentation and check out what it's doing here. Now it's throwing me this red squiggly line. That's because when you create in React, when you create a component, everything needs to be wrapped inside a div. But with the most recent versions of React, or in the past year, they created something called React Fragment, which can be, which is actually a very useful thing. So instead of the page outputting div and then page header nested inside and panel, you have, just like this would not output as anything on the DOM, but the React would work and wrap this whole component up properly, which is pretty useful for us. So now it's here. That's because I haven't imported Zui panel in. All right, let's take it here. So now we're importing Zui panel from Xero React Zui panel. And cool, that should be completed. Looks pretty good. Let's make sure we refresh. So now that panel does appear now with some content that we've already put in. So that's pretty cool. We've got the Xero-based style in, ready to go. Next, we want to actually load in the tweets, because that's the whole point, right? Morgan set up all those stuff for us. We just need to go in and make sure that we load the tweets into the page for the users. So how we can do that is first we set the state to the app. Oh, I'm running out of time here, so I'm speeding through. Okay, so the app would have a state. We have tweet, because we know that there's going to be a few things in the tweet array. So now in React, we go before anything gets displayed in the page, when the components gets called, if the component has mounted, we want to then fetch the API from what Morgan is preparing for us. After we fetch this API, then we make sure that we look at the JSON response object. Then we set the state here with the tweets that we fetched. And now nothing will display because we're just preparing the tweet head. If we wanted to output on the page, we pretty much put it into the area that we want to. So that's JSON stringify, because this came in JSON object format. It won't be readable unless we do this, and then go this state tweets, and we try to display that on the page. Now, hopefully, cool. So now this is displaying the page. Great. Does not make sense to the users, though. No one's going to be able to use this properly. So let's actually wrap this inside some sort of a styling component. So in Zui, we have a very useful called content block. So let's import that in. Import Zui content block. And inside content block, we know that in content item is nested inside the content block. And now we're actually going to go and basically use this content block. So let's see here. Now inside the Zui content block, so instead of doing it this way, because this is only outputting the JSON object, we then go, oh yep, Zui content block. Cool, make that close it for us. And inside the content block, because content block's a wrapper, we want to now start looping in the tweets. It's very scary in the dark here because no one else is on my floor and I'm sitting at the office in the dark.
I should have come and joined you. I'm the floor above you.
Oh.
We should have sat together. I could have kept moving,
right.
kept the lights on.
That's all right. Thank you. Okay, so we're almost done here showing our tweets. So we now put in, oh, yep. So inside content block, which is going to wrap our tweet together in a nice way, add the padding in. We then look at, we can then get the state of this app. We then get all tweets, which we've set state already, we map the tweet and then loop it inside the content block so that each tweet will individually display inside these content block. You see how we have key here because in React, you must have a key to a loop rule component. It's so that React knows, this is where I'm going to inject the data, and so that it don't inject data somewhere else that's undesirable. It's to give us control. We have the primary heading that sets tweezer username. We have a secondary heading, which adds a tweet text here. And since we're kind of over time and I was mumbling, I guess this is where I'll stop. But yeah, so this makes UI really easy for us at Xero because we has already done all this hard work of doing the style, doing all the block and prettifying things for us. We just need to make sure that we do this in a sustainable way. Over to you, Alice, if you don't mind.
No worries, and well done. I know, I mean, I cannot code myself, so I really do not envy people who have to do live coding in front of an audience. So yeah, really well done to you and Morgan. Let me just quickly share my screen and then I will give you the last little bit of information. And just a reminder, do keep posting questions in the Q&A and we'll find some time to go through them. Sorry, 2 secs. My screen is not going full. Why is this not full screen? Anyway, I will continue. Right, so I wanted to just give you a really quick rundown of the grad program and also our internship opportunities that we have this year. So in terms of the graduate program, some of you may already know about this, so I'll keep it quite high level for now, but feel free to reach out to me after this event if you do have any questions about this. But applications are already open and they close on the 14th of May, so you've still got 3 or so weeks to get your application in. It would be to start in February 2022, so that means it's for people currently in their final year, obviously, because it's a graduate opportunity. So if you are in your final year and you're interested in any of our technical programs, now's the time to get your application in. If you join us, you would be a permanent employee from day one, which is awesome. You're not sort of on probation, so to speak, for a year before we then offer you a job after that grad year. You are from day one. And all of our roles are in Auckland or the Wellington office. So what is it like? Well, you've got Alex on the call, who can probably give you quite an accurate picture of what it was like for them last year, having just finished it in February, their first year with us. But essentially, in a nutshell, what it is you do 4 rotations in 1 year. So every 3 months, you move into a different team and you tell us what your preference is in terms of which team you'd like to move into. And that is kind of married up with which teams are available to host a grad for the next 3 months. So there's quite a lot of planning that goes into it, and we try and give you your number 1 preference. Sometimes we have to give you your second or third preference. But over the course of the year, the aim is to learn as much as you can, really develop your technical skills, but also your soft skills, and come out the other end of that year with just a really broad knowledge base of different tech stack and areas of Xero. So it's a fantastic opportunity, and I think all the grads do really surprise themselves with how much they get done in a year's time. With each rotation, you do get a buddy who's within that team that you're rotating through, and they are sort of dedicated to you, almost like a mentor during your time with that team or that project. And over the course of the whole year, you have a dedicated people lead. So they're your go-to manager, and they make sure, for example, that they advocate for you when it comes to rotation planning. They also are there to sign off things like your holiday, to advise you on your career goals. So you have one person who's your real constant, and then a buddy that changes each 3 months. But you can find out more by going to our website, which I unhelpfully have hyperlinked there, but you are not inside this presentation. But don't worry, I'll share that with Katie in the CDES team after today, so you'll have access to the slides and all of the stuff that we're talking about. Oh, and just very quickly, summer internships, we hire all of our interns through Summer of Tech, which you may or may not know. This is also the case for many different tech companies here in New Zealand. So if you haven't signed up yet, sign up. They are honestly the go-to platform for internships in lots of different small, medium, large companies across the country. For us personally, we will be hiring around July time with a view to doing the meet and greet and the interviews a little bit later, like August, September time. So although that's a while away, there are so many things that you can do with Summer of Tech in the meantime, which are like boot camps and workshops and loads of upskilling and ways to network as well and find out what it's like to work, not just here, but at all the other employers as well. So do get involved. And yes, it's paid, and it runs from sort of middle of November to middle of February. And hopefully, if it goes really well, then our aim, as well as yours, hopefully, is to secure a grad job for the following year. So that's why we look for. I don't think I've put it here. No, but it's for penultimate year students. So if you're in your second to final year, second to last year, and that's why, because we like to offer you a role, hopefully to come back the following year and join us as a grad. Oh no, I have put it there. Brilliant. It's been a long day, I think. Great. And just really quickly, the recruitment process, if you're applying for any of the technical roles, so development basically, you would do an online application. I would send you a technical test, which is through HackerRank. So if you're not familiar with that, just go onto the hackerrank.com website and there's loads of ways that you can get used to it. And there's also like a fake test that you can do as well. And if you're successful with that test, I'll send you a video interview. It's one way. So it's pre-recorded questions that we give you, and then you video record yourself doing the answer. It's 4 questions total, takes about 15 minutes to do. If you're successful at all of those stages up to that point, I would then invite you to what we call a grad day, which is essentially 3 interviews in one day, and that's the final stage. So for Summer of Tech, it's called speed interviews, but it's a pretty similar process. Oh, okay. Finally, we are here. We have 6 minutes left. But I guess if we run a few minutes over time, it's not the end of the world. But yeah, ask away. I can see a couple of questions have come through since I started having a
Can
chat
I
there.
just answer basically 2 of the questions?
Go for it.
One of them was, is there a particular reason a class component was used instead of a functional component? And the other was, is there any reason not to use React hooks in the front end? Essentially, those are the same questions. I think a class component was used because it's always been used in code with Xero. And so it was just kind of what was already templated, and Prae didn't have to rewrite a bunch of the code pretty last minute to use a functional component instead. But you could, and it wouldn't make any difference to, well, it would make a difference to what you were writing, but it wouldn't make any difference to the functionality of what you were building.
Yeah, lots of code based in Xero would switch between the two depending on the use cases and how heavily you rely on lifecycle in its past life before React hooks become a thing.
Awesome. Thanks for that. I've just seen a question come through from James saying, where will the speed interviews take place? Great question. That is currently TBC. However, we are almost definitely going to do all of our interviews this year virtually for a few different reasons. Last year, we actually found that COVID forced us, everyone, not just us, but forced everyone to go completely virtual. And a lot of people were actually quite pleasantly surprised by how efficient and friendly it was for the applicants in the process. So it means that we can interview people from all over the country without having to make people travel everywhere. So it's more time efficient, it's less stressful in general, and it means that we can have interviewers from all over the country as well interview you. So so it will almost definitely be virtual, but I will make sure that that's really clear on our website and on Summer of Tech as well if that changes. And the same goes for grad interviews. Cool.
There's a question about if I'm in my final year of uni, could I also apply for both the 2022 grad role and the 2021 summer intern role? I think that's an Alice question.
Yeah, sorry, I thought I'd clicked. I've answered the question because James's was the last one at the time that I clicked. Anyway, you don't need my life story. Right. So if you're in your final year, you can apply for the 2022 grad role, but you wouldn't be able to apply for the internship for the reasons that I very, very quickly skimmed over just then. Basically, for the summer internship, we only offer that role to people in their second to final year. That's to give everyone the best opportunity possible of getting a place on the grad program the next year. It's not a given. They have to sort of, there are a few things that we need to see before we offer you that role by the end of the internship. But yeah, it's only for people at that stage of their uni career. Otherwise, you would do the internship and then you wouldn't be able to join the next week as a grad if you're in your final summer of uni. It's for some really boring HR reasons. Basically, it's super difficult to do that. So yeah, it has to be the year before, unfortunately, from your side. Hope that's okay. Don't feel shy to ask questions if you're worried about time. It's okay if you have one. Ah, here we go. Ah, great, thank you. No worries. Ooh, here we go. Alex, what 4 teams did you rotate through and which did you enjoy the most? Great question.
Yeah. I technically have been in 5 teams at Xero, so I'm going to tell you all 5 of them. As I was an intern, I was in a team in XPM, which is also called Workflow Max. They build not Xero, but an adjacent product to Xero, which people use for job management. In my first rotation, I was in a team called the Comms Pod, but they are a platform engineering team, and their job is to make a bunch of things that are used across Xero, like navigation and email services. My second rotation, I was in the Zui team, so I worked on the components that Prae was using in her demo. My third rotation, I was in the bank feeds team, who build integrations with banks around the world to bring transaction data into Xero. And then my last rotation was in the Xero HQ staff team, which work on Xero HQ, which is like a practice version of Xero for accountants and bookkeepers to manage all of their clients. And my favorite of my rotations was the bank feeds team. I thought it was the most technically challenging, really demanding, and like super interesting. So I have rejoined the pod that I was in my bank feeds rotation as a permanent full-time developer. So I spend most of my time doing back-end work now. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, so just to kind of expand on what Alex just said, when you get towards the end of your grad year, like in your final rotation, what we do is we go out to the whole business and we say to them who would like to take on the grads who are just about to finish their program for the foreseeable future as a member of their team. And the teams basically put their hands up, and then we tell all the graduates who are about to finish the program, here are all the teams. And they're normally teams who the grads have rotated through during the course of the year. They put their hands up and say, we can take grads, and then the grads review all of the options available, and we sort of match up based on who's rotated through where and what people's preferences are and career goals, and we try and give everyone their optimal matches. So like Alex did, they often go back to a team that they've rotated through. It kind of makes sense to do that, and that's why the year is such a great experience because you get to try out all these different areas before figuring out where you'd like to sort of settle down, at least for the next year or two, you know. Yeah.
And like for context, although it's not guaranteed for my year, absolutely everybody got their first choice.
Yeah. Yeah, and for context as well, from the year just gone, Alex's year, everyone bar, I think it was 2 people got their number 1 preference, and those other people only didn't get their first preference because there were like 5 people going for 3 spots in this one particular team. I won't name names in terms of teams, but yeah, it's sort of a classically popular team for a few different reasons, but they were still really happy. The other 2, they got their second preferences, and yeah, everyone's cracking on really well, I think, now.
From the hosting team perspective, it's always super interesting. It's like, oh my God, who are we getting next? And like,
Yeah.
how do we make sure the onboarding is like greater than that other team upstairs?
Yeah, teams get really competitive, and
It's wild.
it's super exciting just because everybody gets really into it, and a lot of people really enjoy mentoring grads and interns, and that's something that the whole business gets really excited about. A grad gives a really fresh view on things to a team. Often a grad will come into a team and question why, and you'll kind of go, huh, why? So it's really valuable.
I'm pretty sure our onboarding docs got so much better over the last year because we just had all these new people coming in. It's like peer reviewing our onboarding docs. I think it's pretty mint now, but
yeah, it's quite cool, I think, because people think that grads are quite cool. They're like, I want to be in with the grads because they're the hip young people in the office. And even though none of us felt really hip or young or anything, everyone was just trying to get you to join their team and bring something to them. So it was really cool having people nag you about what teams you were going to be in. And yeah, it was just a really cool, wholesome experience.
I feel like if you don't think you're cool, hip, and young, it's because you actually are. I feel like that's just a very humble take on it. Yeah. All right. I think we've got maybe time for one more question if anyone has one burning, or if you don't, no worries. We can wrap it up here. Alrighty. Okay, well, thank you all so much again for giving us your time this evening. Thanks to the amazing back-end and front-end presenters, Morgan and Prae, and Alex and Akshay for joining as well to field some of your questions. I hope that's been a really interesting insight into how we sort of hypothetically go about coding here at Xero. Like I say, applications are now open, so if you're interested in the grad role or any of our grad roles, please do apply now. And if you're interested in the internship, keep your eyes peeled on Summer of Tech, register, go to all the workshops and boot camps that you have time for. You will not regret it. And I will forward the slides and the YouTube link to this recording to CDES after today. It might take a few days to sort that out, just FYI, because I am traveling around a bit at the moment. So just need to wait for that recording to come through, and then I will share it with all of you. Okay? Thank you. Cool. Have a great evening, everyone. Speak to you soon.